Hello and thank you for visiting our website, rebuilderinabox.com. Today we're going to be working on the 4G alternator. Here you can see several different versions. This one on the Taurus with the double overhead cam. This one a much later model on the Ford Escape. And this one is a very common body style for the Aerostar and Explorer. You can know that you have a 4G alternator by the metal shield on the back. The black metal cover on a Ford, that's a 4G alternator. We'll be calling the kits for the 4G different color codes. It refers to the plug on the voltage regulator. This would be a 4G gray, a 4G white, and a 4G black. We're going to start by taking the pulley off with a 1/2 inch impact and a 15/16 socket. Put the rag around the pulley. Then temporarily put the nut back onto the shaft to protect the threads. Locate the 3 bolts with the 5/16 head on them and remove them. Then the lid comes right off. Then find the 3 screws that hold the voltage regulator brush holder assembly on. These are T20, and remove those 3. Then the voltage regulator brush holder assembly comes right off. Now we're going to take a really close look at the slip ring, which is this thing right here where the brushes ride on. 99% of the time when you tear one apart, this is what you're going to find. This is where the brushes ride, and as is common in most Fords, also common in the 3G, also common in the 6G, the bottom brush where the spark comes out of the voltage regulator and goes through the brush into the coil has a burnt place, and you can see where it's worn all the way down to the plastic, and you can see the arcing and the black where it's been burnt through. This is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is you know that this is your problem. You definitely have a bad alternator, and you're ready to move forward with fixing the vehicle. The bad news is on the 4G, it's not very cost effective to replace just the slip ring. What we recommend, and the way our kits work, is we're going to replace the whole rotor assembly. What we have to do now is we have to get the drive-in aluminum plate off of the rectifier stator assembly while the rotor's still in it. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. The one way is you can start by a good long 8-hour to 24-hour soak to try and break down any corrosion that's dissimilar metal corrosion between the iron ore stator and the aluminum housing, which is spraying it down with your favorite type of rust bust, and then tap it like that all the way around the whole outer circumference, the whole outer diameter of the aluminum plate to break anything loose. The second method is you can put it in the oven for about a half an hour and let it bake at about 300 to 325, and this will expand the outer aluminum at a higher rate than the iron ore that's in between it and make things a little easier to take apart. Sometimes you can just take them apart cold, and this is one of the reasons, this is the reason why we left a nut on the bottom. You can set the shaft on the flat part of the back of the vise and slam it down. while holding your hands on the outer part of it. But probably what you're going to get the most effective removal is from casual tapping all around the outside of the diameter, and then take the nut off, hold on to the back half with one hand, and I'm just tapping from side to side. Oftentimes also it can be facilitated with some rust bust down in the shaft, because that bearing is being slid off of the shaft, so any lubrication that we can get on that is also going to assist us in getting it apart. And now we have the stator, rectifier, rotor assembly, and the drive-in plate with the bearing. Now what we need to do is open up the vise to an exact width so that the windings will go down in between the jaws, but the outside of the stator will sit on the sides of the vise. So it just kind of sits in the vise like that. It's sitting on the outer lamination stacks, but it's not tightened up on the windings. Then we're going to take a 3/4 deep well thick socket with a 1/2 inch drive and set it over top of the slip ring, and make sure that it fits loosely so that there would be no damage to the slip ring as we reinstall another one. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that socket over top of the slip ring just so it sets on the inner race of this bearing. We're not going to mess too much with the outer race, but we want to tap on the inner race. So as you can see, the 4G doesn't really break down into a whole lot of parts. We have the rectifier stator assembly, which we're going to leave together, and 99% of the time we reuse that whole assembly. The drive-in housing with the bearing, the rotor, which the top bearing is going to stay on, but we're just going to leave it on there. We don't need to pull it off because we're going to discard the whole thing anyway. Then of course the cover, and then over here you can see the voltage regulator, the 3 screws that hold it down, the 3 bolts that hold the whole thing together. Looking down in the drive-in aluminum housing, you'll see the 3 T20 bolts that hold the bearing cover on. Take those 3 out and then take the bearing cover off. So then that's off. We're just going to turn it over to get the bearing out. We're going to use a 3/8 extension, then tap the bearing out by moving it from side to side. We're going to use the same 3/8 to tap the new bearing back into place. The thing is, you have to tap on the outer race. When you're tapping a bearing into a plate, into something that retains it from the outside, you only tap on the outer race. Move around in a circle and tap just a little bit at a time to get it to go in evenly to where it's clear down in there flush. Since we are going to be reusing the stator and rectifier assembly, we do have to perform some maintenance on it, and that consists of 2 tools that you're going to need: a piece of sandpaper and a wire toothbrush. The first area of concern is we have to clean up this ground path right here. A lot of times there's some corrosion on that surface that I'm showing you, which is actually the bottom part of the rectifier, but that fits into the plate. and that is a ground path. So we have to clean that real efficiently with a piece of sandpaper and possibly a wire toothbrush, and then put a thin layer of either dielectric or white lithium grease on that surface the whole way around. Then we have 3 areas that have to be cleaned meticulously with a wire toothbrush. These 3 contact areas are here, here, and there, the ground on the rectifier. These 2 places are both voltage during running time, and this is a ground. So we have to take a wire toothbrush and clean these areas here. There's a metal tab around the outside of it there, and then that one there where the ground is. Those have to be cleaned up very efficiently, and as always we have to put a thin layer of either dielectric or white lithium grease after we're done. Also, the battery stud, which is a little bit of a weird design, we'll kind of explain that later. Take your wire toothbrush and clean up the threads real well, and clean up the flat spot where the battery cable is going to go on. One of the problems that we've had to correct over the years, particularly on alternators that are installed in some tight spots on the vehicle, is a little bit of a design thing, because the metal plate is extremely close to the top of the rectifier leads. So if this metal plate gets mashed down in this area here at all, it'll go down and short out and cause a diode plate to short out. What we do when we rebuild them, and what we want you to do, is put a piece of black tape over all these hot spots. You can see these little stator leads that come up, and the diode leads where they're soldered into the rectifier. Those are all hot when the battery's hooked up to it. So up in here is not so much of a problem because they line up with the holes. So you want to not put black tape there, but the problem area where sometimes if somebody drops the alternator or smashes it or dents it a little bit during installation, we always put a piece of black tape along that outer diameter. Now we're ready to start putting her back together. Set the plate on top of the vise. Put the rotor down inside the bearing. If you have to, if it doesn't go in, you can help tap it down in with the hammer handle. Don't hit it with the hammer. Take note that the 3 holes where the bolts go through, when you go to set this back on here, lines up with the 3 holes where the bolts are going to be threaded into, and make sure that you got the battery post pointing in the direction that you want it. Set it on there like that, and this next step, it's going to be a big help if we take a piece of sandpaper and sand out the entire inside of this. You could even take a some sort of tool on your Dremel or drill, like a buffing wheel or a sanding wheel, and sand out the entire inside diameter of the drive-in housing. And what we're going to do is heat up the entire outside diameter of the drive-in plate. Don't get any heat up on the rotor, but just get all the heat on this outer perimeter. And you're going to want to do that for a good 5 minutes or so to get everything really expanded, and then line everything up and set it right down in. Might have to take a few taps. If your bolt holes aren't lined up exactly, You can hold on to the rectifier and tap the bottom plate one way or the other so that the bolt holes line up exactly. And you'll want to notice that the rectifier is all the way in that area right there. Now we're looking at the rotor. What we want to do is just put a couple drops of oil where the bearing is going to go and go around. Try not to get any on the copper. If you do, you can get some kind of cleaner and take it back off again. But this will make bearing installation a lot easier. Also, what we're going to do is put some oil on the outer race of the bearing itself before we install. Now we're just going to set our bearing down on there again, and you can move the shaft around a little bit if it's not centered. Set it on there and get it started straight. When you get it lined up to where it's starting perfectly straight, then get your 3/4 socket and finish tapping it down on there. And here's a look at how deep that goes on there. You don't really want to keep on going and going until it stops, because there's a piece of plastic on the bottom and you don't want to smash that piece of plastic. Just eyeball that area right there, and all you need is just to get about that deep. Then we're going to put the new voltage regulator on. Then we're going to put the 3 T20 Torx screws in. Make sure that everything lays flat. Get all 3 screws just finger tight, and then go around and tighten them up about 1/4 of a turn each so that everything is evenly. And what we're doing now is going around and making sure that these are very nice and snug, because this is a surface area contact, and in our opinion that's kind of a poor design. However, on the 4G there are not particularly a lot of problems with this area like there are in the 6G, as we explained in the 6G movie. But anyway, get these as snug as you can. Not so much that they might strip, but not loose at all. Then we're going to put the 3 bolts in with the 5/16 socket and tighten those up. Then we're putting the pulley back on. Holding on to the outside of the pulley with a rag, and using a 1/2 inch impact with a 15/16 socket. Okay, now we're going to explain to you a little bit about the battery stud, the output post. If you decide that you're going to take this to a local parts store and have it spin checked before you reinstall, the way this is designed is a little bit peculiar. These 2 lines here would be the rectifier, and this is the battery output post itself. If there's not a nut on here tightened up, it leaves a space in here, and that's where the contact is made. So if you want to spin check this thing, you have to put a nut on the battery stud and tighten it down so that the contact area is tight and doesn't leave any gaps in between here.